I want to tell you about me and Lynn a little bit. Wouldn't that be nice? You want to know about us? We got married in a fire. No. She's going to get me. Lynn and I met at my mother's home. And she came walking in. I had just got back from the military, and I'm sitting in this chair. I actually had one of these. I remember now. And I had some long hair. I'm sitting in the chair. I didn't know anybody in Bradenton. And so Mom says, "What you going to do tonight?" I said, "I don't know. I don't know nobody here." She says, "Well, why don't you stay and go to my jewelry party?" I didn't have anything else to do, so I stayed in the jewelry party. Thank God I did. Because I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden, this blonde-haired, beautiful woman comes around the corner, and I look at her, and the Holy Spirit says, "That is going to be your wife." Isn't that cool? Well, one thing led to another. You know, we actually started going out, and that was May. By September, we were starting to date. She calls it, I just going bowling, I call it dating. And by November, we were engaged. And by February, we were married. Talk about fast, right? Till my daughter came along. Sharon, she got married in what? She met Andrew in December, was married in March. And she said, "Dad, Mom and Dad, you guys did it fast." And we did. So me and Lynn are married in February. We go on our honeymoon, we come back. And we had an apartment rented. But the apartment had bugs, termites, and they tented our apartment. And so Lynn and I were going to go back to my mom and dad's house. And Lynn looks at me and she goes, "I'm not going to go back in your mom and dad's house." And I said, "Well, we don't have any more money. We just spent all our money on our honeymoon." We pitched a tent in the backyard. Didn't we? And I remember laying there thinking, I could be in the house in a nice warm bed. February's not too warm here, right? This is quite interesting. And I'm laying there, and I can remember just praying. And I remember the God just came on me, and all of a sudden, the presence of God was there in that tent. I remember looking at her going, "Honey, we're going to the mission field." And I'm just crying. And she's looking at me going, at that time, she was hoping that God would give me a pastor's heart to stay in America. And I could just, look on her facial expression on her face was like, "Maybe you might go, but I'm not going nowhere." We finally get back into our apartment, which my brother-in-law and sisters had trashed. Remember, had the bed? They did something to the bed, and we got in the bed and went, and Lynn looks at me, "Rah!" And I look at her, "Rah!" You kind of getting this what I'm talking about. Not too much longer after that, we're in this church, and God begins to move on me, and I start weeping again, because God has put a call in my life to be on the mission field. I know it. And I'm weeping, and I'm crying. I'm looking at her, and I'm thinking, and she says, "What's wrong with you?" And I go, I had already prayed and said, "God, you got to speak to her. You got to share with her." And so, 2 weeks later, she starts to cry. And, we go down, we talk to the pastor, and the pastor says, "You need training." We go off to Bible school. We'll start preparing to go off to Bible school. Okay, that was August. No, that wasn't. That was probably May of that year. We were working over the summer. We get into a pickup truck, a little Toyota pickup truck with a camper top on the back and a trailer with all our worldly possessions, and we go to Pensacola, Florida. I take my wife to a city. I don't know nobody. They don't know me. We don't have any place to stay. So for 2 weeks, we camp out again in a, what do you call those places? KOA place. In August. No air condition in the back of the little pickup truck. Well, there's about this much space to sleep in. And so every time you turn, you hit your elbow on the top of the thing. And Lynn looks at me, and I look at her. What I'm saying to you is, God, was dealing and working in our lives, and there was problems, and there was, I remember going to, being in school and thinking, okay, we're going to wait till we get to the mission field before we have babies. And all of a sudden, I'm doing a vacuum on the floor, and I'm vacuuming away, and all of a sudden, the cord gets pulled out. I look around, there's Lynn with the cord in her hand. And then she goes, I got something to tell you. It's really cool. I'm thinking, what is it? Put the plug back in so I can finish the job. I'm pregnant. And I went, oh. It's like the wind was knocked out of me because we were trying to go to finish Bible school and then go to the mission field, and babies weren't the plan, but it was God's plan. Life, dealing with one another, having a relationship. There was something that was implanted in Lynn and I, and this is what we had agreed on when we got married. The D word was never going to be spoken in our home. You know what the D word is? We don't even say that word. And a lot of that was contributed to my mom and dad. They've been married 57 years. 57 years. And Lynn's mom and dad, they had been married when your mother passed away, was what, 30-some years? 37 years. I lived in my mom and dad's home, and I saw what went on. When you live in your home, you see what mom and dad does. It's pretty obvious. But I always knew that they had a covenant with one another, and they were not going to break that covenant. We live in a world of covenant breakers. Isn't it true? It's rampant. If you don't like them, you leave them. Can I tell you another story? I love stories. Has anybody ever windsurfed? Have you windsurfed before? That's hard, isn't it? When I was in California, there was this lake out there near the base, and they would windsurf on this lake. And so I decided I wanted to learn how to do that. So I started learning how to windsurf. It was really interesting. When the wind was not blowing too much, to get up on that thing and get going was really hard. Very difficult. When the storms were blowing, when the wind was blowing hard, it was a lot easier to get going and learn how to maneuver that thing. It was so cool. I got to the place on that because I was a lot skinnier and smaller. But you could get those things flying across the water and get the sail back just enough. So how you doing, girl? You could lift up, the wind would lift that board and everything, and you'd be just skimming across the top of the water. It was really a lot of fun. Smooth seas do not make skillful sailors. Smooth seas do not make skillful sailors. Do you hear me? When we look for smooth seas, it just keeps us weak. When we hope for surrounding ourselves with people just like us, it keeps us weak. When we hope for, or when we can only run with people who agree with me, who are like me, when I can only love people who are safe, it keeps me weak. Do you know what made Lynn and my marriage strong? The conflict. And getting over it. And saying, you know what? We have a covenant. And we are not going to break it.